Thanks for joining us this morning's session. We're hoping it'll be insightful. I think first thing to say is there's obviously a big elephant in the room with regards negative press and media on the carbon world. And as someone who lives and breathes conservation on the ground, I do genuinely believe it's got a real place to play in the conservation space going forward. I think the critical thing is understanding quality and genuine implementation on the ground. It's very easy to tick a box, but as I say, today we'll hopefully take you through the process of developing a genuine project, which is live and working and generating revenue for the communities at hand. So just before we start, we'll introduce ourselves. My name is Kieran Avery. I was born and brought up in Kenya, which is where I still live. I actually trained as a vet and came back into the conservation space in 2016, where I was tasked with looking at wildlife dynamics and translocations as well as livestock genetics and seeing whether we could help pastoral communities improve their genetics to develop more of a market base for them. But quickly realized how degraded the landscape was and that improving genetics really isn't feasible until you've got fodder that they can actually eat. So my role transitioned to one of natural resource management and then into the carbon world because since 2016 when I started, this carbon project has been under development, and initially I was very skeptical, I'll be honest. But as I sort of lived and breathed the NGO sector and realized that reality is conservation has to become commercial, in my opinion. I think that depending on donor aid and grants, when you come to the scale of what we're working on here, it just doesn't work. So that's why I got so excited by the carbon world, and that's why my role is now focused on carbon operations.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Avery O'Keefe, also with Native. I'm on the asset management team with Native based in Vermont in the United States. My background focuses on technical auditing, so with experience kind of working in geoengineering consultancies. And so, for me, coming to a conference like this has certainly been inspiring and eye-opening for someone that doesn't really have a lot of experience in wildlife conservation, and certainly opened my eyes to the opportunities that do exist. And for us in this project, this has certainly been an opportunity for us to learn more about what we can do from learning from each other. And then a little bit more about what I do at Native. I'm really responsible for the monitoring and reporting for verifications of our rangelands and grasslands projects. And so with Kieran, I'm working primarily on the Northern Kenya project that we'll go into today, and kind of ensuring that the continued operations are in place so that we can have a successful project for the entirety of its 30 years. So a little bit about Native. We are a carbon offset project developer, marketer, and realtor. Like I said, based out of Vermont, the big city of Burlington, actually, over in the United States. As a developer in the carbon market for over 20 years, our focus remains on finding ways to provide catalytic and meaningful climate action. As we all know, there's certainly demand from supporters and consumers for the continuation and evolution of the voluntary carbon market. And so with over 80 years of with over 80 validated projects of all types, we've done projects in climate technology, we've done projects in agroforestry, of course, rangeland grassland projects. Native is really, focuses on providing that service of developing and managing carbon projects from that concept to that, that point of revenue generation.
So just to take you through expectations for today, I'll introduce the Northern Kenya project because that will be obviously practical and relevant to a lot of you. We'll look at carbon revenue and how it can be really valuable as a conservation tool, again with practical experience on the ground. Then we'll talk through the monitoring, reporting and verification side of things, which is obviously where a lot of the heat is coming in the press, and that's what Carl specializes in. And then we'll be transitioning to where we're using and beginning to use EarthRanger and how carbon projects can be developed going on into the future. So Northern Kenya Rangelands Carbon Project. Again, at the beginning of this conversation, I want to make it clear that we're not talking here about forest or REDD-based projects. This is very much a novel concept. It's based around soil-based carbon. So the whole theory is you take carbon from the air, put it into grasses, ideally, but also other plants, and they put it into their roots, and that's where the carbon is sequestered, and that's effectively what you're being paid for doing. The scale of the project is significant. People keep talking about millions of hectares, and I think to a lot of people it's quite hard to sort of understand what a million hectares is. This project's it's 1.9 million hectares, and it's this yellow shaded area. Sorry, I'm trying to get this to work. This yellow shaded area in the middle is the project. It's 14 conservancies, community-based conservancies, so no private entities. It's all community land. And if you look at the bigger area, that is where Northern Rangelands Trust, the NRT, have their other conservancies, as well as some on the coast of Kenya. So NRT's footprint is about 6 million hectares, and the project itself is 1.9. And as I say, just to put it into perspective, if I jump in the plane, it takes me 2 hours to fly from one end to the other. So it's massive. What's really cool about this project and the landscape is that it's completely open. If I fly that 2 hours, I don't cross one fence, which just shows you the potential for biodiversity conservation, especially elephant. There's a big population of free-roaming elephant up there, which is increasing annually, and obviously lots of other endemic wildlife species. But also with that comes complexities of land management and tenure. Obviously, those communities have their conservancies in inverted commas, but there's no hard boundaries. There's lots of weapons, lots of fighting, lots of historic tribal conflict. So it's really complicated when it comes to managing land communally. And that's ideally what this project's about. This won't be new to many of you. This is the actual state of the ground in northern Kenya. You can see a traditional homestead here in the corner. And the reality is, over the last 30 or 40 years, there's just been an exponential increase in humans. And with that, a real change in livestock demographics to adapt to these climate-changing times. And with that, we've just seen sort of sedentary pastoralism and real destruction of the rangelands. This is interesting. I'm just trying to show you this. This was sent to me 2 days ago, or 3 days ago. So this is the current state in northern Kenya. We haven't had rain for about 3.5 years, and then it rains. And the reality is this isn't exceptional rainfall. It's pretty normal. They've probably had 150 mils over the last 10 days. But what you're seeing here is a symptom of degradation. And what frustrates me is a lot of people will say this is climate change. And I'm not a hater of climate change, but I do feel that it's used as a scapegoat. And the reality is a lot of what we're seeing is just down to mismanagement. And that's where we have an opportunity to step in. Another symptom, again, which I think is often just pushed and pushed, people say, oh, we've got invasive species, we've got gullies, we've got to heal them, is invasive species here. You can see, it's quite hard to see here, but all these little plants around here are an invasive cactus called a puntia, which was introduced from Central America. And the elephants love it. They basically depend on it now, as well as baboons in the dry season, because the fruit is so tasty. But it's just wreaking havoc, and that cactus thrives on degraded land. So again, we've got to treat the cause, which is mismanagement. It's not, the cause isn't the invasive species. And then ultimately what we're seeing is this, these poor guys, these pastoralists, who are so culturally proud. They don't have bank accounts. Everything they own is in their livestock. They get to the end of a 2.5 year drought. And they basically just watch their livestock fall away in front of them, and they lose everything. And obviously with that comes such heated conflict, and obviously human death as well. But that's all negative. Now we'll talk about the positive. And that's where this carbon is really exciting for me personally, and us as a project. This is a happy Samburu herdsman with a very happy cow in the same landscape that I've been showing you those bad pictures of. So it's beginning to work. I've talked about the scale. I think the important thing is it's not just for people and livestock, it's also for wildlife. People often forget the wildlife aspect. And then ultimately, the fact that it's going to generate revenue for communities is the ultimate goal. I'll let you read these, but just to talk about, again, I think something that a lot of us as practitioners on the ground forget is the actual climate status and the impact that we can have on the climate, because we're so focused on money and conservation. If you read this one here, this project, if we can get it to potential, can remove the annual emissions from 10 million cars in the soils of northern Kenya. So it's really significant. And when we talk about climate change and climate impact, it's got the real opportunity to address that. Another one to note on this slide is this triple gold certified. Carl will come on to different standards later and to talk you through those, but it's quite an important thing to sort of respect and understand if you're working in the conservation space, because say you're working on a private land where you just got a commercial cattle ranch, you might be able to improve your grasslands, but there might not be that much else to add on. With this triple gold, this project is recognized because of the biodiversity significance it protects, and also the fact that it's a community project. So it sort of acts as like a bonus when it comes to selling the credits in the market, because people are more willing to buy from them, given the benefits it provides. And then obviously in this day and age, women and youth empowerment is massive, especially in these traditional African communities where the men dominate and always have done. And the cool thing about this project is it insists on inclusivity, transparency throughout the demographic within the human population. Theory of change, before I get into this, because it looks very simple on paper, and again you can read it and I'll talk you through it, but one thing to note again is the significance of the context. These tribes and pastoral communities of northern Kenya have had a massive breakdown in their traditional strengths and practices, mainly because of human population growth, alcohol, social media, politics, all the usual things, corruption, and also the NGO factor. You can't deny it. And what's happened is, this what used to be so strong and worked so well when they were nomads is just not working anymore. So a big criticism that we get of this project is you're trying to manipulate traditional practices. And the reality is we're not at all. We're just trying to reintroduce them. Whereas, historically there would have been more dialogue and discussion and planning. It's now much more about aggression and violence with weapons and pushing your way. So this project is really about just taking a step back, saying, listen, guys, we've all got a problem here. Let's come together. Let's talk. Let's plan and make it work. So effectively, the whole thing is about improved grazing management. One of the big issues here is the small stock sheep and goats, but effectively they are working together to look at dry season and wet season blocks, and obviously using those intermittently so that between use, the ground gets a chance to recover and for the plants to grow. And then, like I said earlier, with more plant cover, especially perennial grasses, because northern Kenya's got loads of annuals, but just no perennials, you get deeper roots, you get deeper storage of carbon. Those generate carbon credits, which are verified and measured, as Carl will talk to you about just now. And then that's what we sell on the market as revenue for the conservancies. In terms of numbers, because I think this will be of interest to a lot of you, and this is just a benchmark, so this isn't, this is just to give you an idea. This project started back in 2012, and I'll come to expectations, but the first revenue only flowed in 2021, so that's the reality. It was 9 years in the making, and it's quite confusing. You actually are selling credits based on historic generation. So this $14.6 million was 3 years. It was 2013 to 2016 credits, which the project generated. And what's really cool with this project, we've worked really closely with the communities at hand to develop a really robust governance structure, because governance is everything, where they themselves have nominated effectively a representative committee who work with us and the technical partners to develop or to make key decisions on behalf of the communities. So it's fully inclusive and fully transparent. And what they agreed was that they would split that 3 years, the 2013 to 2016 revenue, over 3 years, so that it wasn't all one lump sum and then they had a gap, which was neat and obviously made sense. So effectively, each conservancy has received $320,000 for the first 2 years and will receive the same next year. Just to put that into significance, if you were to put that revenue, inject it now into that landscape at a household level, so it doesn't go there, I'll tell you where it goes, but if you put it into a household level, it would raise, the living, I don't know how you'd put it, but their daily spend would increase by 20%, or available daily spend would increase by 20%. And in a poverty area, that's massive. But what they actually chose to do was to obviously initially fund their core operations costs, and this is where it's such a valuable conservation tool, and I'll come on to it. So 40% of that revenue goes into their actual conservancy. It funds their managers and their rangers' salaries and ongoing costs of vehicles and whatever they need to do, holding meetings. And then 60% goes into a community fund, which is what the community then choose to spend on projects which benefit them, and that's where the tangible benefit comes in. And there's lots of debate about where that should go, how it should be used, and it's obviously going to evolve over the coming years. Important to note that NRT, who are the project proponent or owner, they don't make any profit from this. They cover minimal sort of fixed costs, and really it's too little. But that's what their part in this is just to help the community to deliver it. So important to note they don't make any profit from it. So just coming on to my opinion as a conservation tool, and why I think a lot of you should reflect on this and sort of consider it potentially going forward. Firstly, the practical aspects. A lot of it, and again, this won't be new to any of you, a lot of the limitations that we see in the conservation world is flexible funding to spend up front. It's often so limited by a donor's need or whatever an agreement is. But the cool thing about carbon money is if you work with the right developer, they'll often put money in up front to say, you can't wait 10 years for revenue, but you need this money now to help generate that revenue. So they'll put up the upfront capital. So you can work tomorrow on putting in critical infrastructure, whether it's water, fences, whatever it is that you need for your landscape. The second thing is this incentive for change, and it's massive in my opinion. I've worked with these communities for 7 years with an NGO hat on, and they just didn't wait. That's the reality of it. It's the problem with the NGO world. We've created this dependency. And not everywhere, that's not a blanket statement, but in northern Kenya in particular. So what's so cool about this carbon revenue is it's an incentive. It's suddenly commercial, and that's a really important point. It's commercial, so they have to earn it, and they have to understand that it's earned. It's not just given. And for me, that's massive because you suddenly get this buy-in at a different level, which will encourage this incentive for change. Secondly, financial aspects. As Carl said, this project's 30 years long. It's not just a 3-year grant; it's 30 years. And they can span between 20 and 40 depending on the project and the situation. But that's so significant. Imagine having, if you're confident in the implementation of a project, imagine having 30 years of sort of guaranteed funding ahead of you, flexible funding ahead of you. The second thing is it's sustainable in that it's sustainable if you implement what you say you're supposed to implement. So if the communities get together and they grow more grass, it's commercial revenue, it's sustainable, it generates itself. Thirdly, scalable. This is another massive issue, I think, in the NGO grant world is scale. A lot of donors want to focus in a particular area, a particular county. This is touching on 1.9 million hectares and has the potential to do another 3 or 4 projects of a similar size. So that's really significant. And then this last one of flexibility, which, again, won't be new to anyone. You're not bound by a donor's requirements or a grant's needs. It's for you to use where you need to use it. Lastly is these stack benefits. I mentioned that CCB status, the gold status, triple gold. Because northern Kenya has immense biodiversity, it's got eastern black rhino, reticulated giraffe, basa oryx, Grevy's zebra. It's got this sort of bonus in terms of the biodiversity factor, and obviously these community conservancies were developed in essence to protect and conserve biodiversity, so they should be recognized for that. And I'm sure there'll be questions on these biodiversity credits and this whole sort of biodiversity scheme which is being developed, and no one really knows where it's going to go. From our side, we feel it's better as an add-on like this. So sell a project because it's doing lots of biodiversity rather than just doing biodiversity on its own. And obviously, it'll be applicable in different places in different ways. And then this value for communities, again, as I say, because this is community land, it's not private land. It's really recognized within the international market. So I think just leading on to this, Carl will step in now. I just want everyone to manage expectations. This isn't an easy process. As I say, this project that we have got up and running took 9 years to validate. Obviously, it was the first of its kind, so it pioneered the way, and I would hope that it will be much quicker in the future. But just be prepared for a lot of work to get there, but it's worth it in the end.
Thanks, Kieran. So, with that background of the Northern Kenya project, just wanted to kind of go into, a little bit of the complexities of carbon projects and really what it takes to develop a project like this. As you can see here, there's a lot to grasp, and that's purposeful. It is a whole nother sector. It's a whole nother market, and it's unlike a lot of projects that anyone has ever experienced. And so there are a lot of considerations that you need to think about. And so first, I really want to focus here on the working with this validation and verification body. So very similar to a third-party auditor. They really come in as the hammer, so to speak. They're the technical reviewer of the project, and so before you can kind of have a project that is marketable and ready for for operations, you need to go through this validation process. And so working with a VVB is crucial to getting to that validation stage. And so this will often include, intensive site visits from that auditor. So they'll be, coming to the project to not only conduct interviews, with community members, interviews with your team that's working on the project. In a rangeland grassland project, they're going to be, doing soil sampling, or alongside your soil sampling team, and really testing you essentially along the way to ensure that this project has what it takes to kind of continue in operations for the duration of that, in our case 30 years. The next thing I wanted to point out here is that monitoring, reporting, and verification. So once validation, you hit that validation mark, it's exciting. It's a milestone certainly, but it doesn't end there, right? There is constantly, critiques from media and from even supporters of the project that are trying to learn more about what you're doing to continuously improve the project. And so this is where that ongoing verification, which will also require a third-party auditor, and a lot of the similarities that go into a validation review, a bit lighter, will take place, years in chunks of years after the project. And so, for the 2013 to 2016 verification, where this Northern Kenya project had their first issuance of credits, there was a requirement for a site visit on top of that, validation site visit. So 2 site visits in a span of not that many years by 2 totally, totally different auditors trying to learn about this project. You can imagine that takes a lot of time, not only from your team, but from those on the ground that are trying to coordinate and facilitate an essential deep dive of your project and really defend your project so that it can kind of reach that verification stage. So, who sets the requirements? It's the voluntary carbon market is quite broad. There are a couple key players that really set the standards. And so, for us, we use the Verified Carbon Standard, which is run by a nonprofit organization that many have probably heard the name, Vera. And so for us, this project, it's also validated under that separate standard called the Climate, Community, and Biodiversity Standard, as Kieran was referencing. And so if you're, deciding on, a VCS project and you want to add on that CCB standard as well, those are 2 totally distinct requirements that you'll need to adhere to and take into consideration in your project design. And so, essentially what the standards do is they provide the minimum for your project design and structure, and then from there you can build on that and kind of customize, what that operational plan is going to look like. So how do we measure impact over time? I think first off, it all starts with the community members. It starts with the stakeholders, the herders, and so we have annual community surveying that's carried out. It really helps us understand kind of the status of project implementation. It also provides an avenue for feedback, so we can learn more about, how is this project working for the pastoralists? How is this project working for NRT's field team that are working directly with the herders? And then also provides insight for us on kind of, where can we improve and kind of, what is the impact to date? Another important piece, of course, as this is a soil carbon project, is soil sampling. And so this is something that is carried out across the landscape at predetermined intervals, and it's really used to understand kind of the long-term impacts, the climate impacts, and the changes in like the soil health over time due to the project activities. And then lastly, but certainly something that we're focusing on heavily at the moment, is the use of remote sensing, and really, really trying to bring in, the ever-improving satellite data that we can access, which provides the project with a powerful tool to understand how not only herders are moving across the landscape, but also, lets us understand a little bit more about forage availability and, vegetation indices, and, provides us with some insight on, the correlation between the project activities and the rangeland health. So a key part of the project is of course the monitoring and reporting. And so the project doesn't happen without these grazing reports. And so, these are monthly reports that come from herders that really are key to the success of the project. I think for what it's worth, I think looking at these reports and understanding that, this is a compilation of discussions essentially that rangeland coordinators are having with herders in the field each month to understand not only the location of their livestock, but also understand kind of the status of the forage availability in those areas. And so, on our end, these reports, these grazing reports, I'll show an example in a minute, but they're translated to accounting requirements that we have as a carbon project, and really kind of act almost as ways to be conservative in our estimates of change across the landscape. Well, here's a slide that you likely can't read from back there, but this is an example of a Conservancy monthly report. It's organized by grazing blocks, and so these reports really provide the project with that understanding of livestock populations and kind of the movements over time. This is an image that I'm sure on the right here that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. So EarthRanger is allowing us to integrate to a much more powerful tool that will not only track collared livestock movements spatially in real time, but also provide us with that ability to visualize trends. Really excited to hear about EcoScope coming down the pipeline. I think that's going to be huge for the EarthRanger platform.
Carl, can I just step in there? EarthRanger, initially we were a bit dubious or doubtful of it just because it's so good at collecting figures and as Carl said, like collar data. But we're actually using it to collect social data, which is quite cool. So we've developed templates which don't have free text. They're all based on drop-down boxes, but which collect the data we need in standard form, which doesn't require somebody writing an essay which never gets read. So it's really going to make our reporting much simpler as well on the social side, as well as just the usual data we collect.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't, thank EarthRanger and of course NRT. We're fortunate to have 51 Degrees as an implementation partner right there in Lewa, and so they really help us, incorporate EarthRanger into our project and helping us move to kind of this digital platform. So if grazing reports were key to the project, I would argue that grazing plans are core to the project. The project activities is obviously planned rotational grazing, and essentially the planned rotational grazing is really allowing for the rangelands to kind of restore perennial grasses. We're looking for that shift from bare ground annual grasses to the much more rigorous and healthier perennial grasses that can kind of withstand impacts of drought. And so what happens here is we're looking for these grazing plans to essentially be a legacy of the project. And so while right now they're being used for herders to kind of have discussions and understand where they should move livestock for the upcoming wet season, taking into account what happened over the past year in terms of weather patterns and forage availability. It's also something that it allows them to kind of come together and have that kind of collective approach for how are we going to strategically set ourselves up for success, and kind of really utilizing those wet and dry season blocks to not only make sure we're not overgrazing, but also to provide a buffer for ourselves in case there are unexpected changes in weather that will require kind of the use of that that extended forage buffer. So as I said earlier, of course, the project does collect soil samples. It's required per the project design and the applied methodology. The sampling points are randomized and generated for each conservancy. We utilize a lab to analyze the results of our sampling efforts, and it also provides us with insights on how to true up and calibrate the selected biogeochemical model that the project uses to understand the changes in SOC, in soil organic carbon, over time. And I think one thing that we're extremely focused on is soil science is evolving. It's a relatively new field, and so we're always trying to think of ways that we can continue to apply any kind of updates in soil science to our project, to our protocol, so that we can really understand the best approach for measuring that soil carbon over time, because it's certainly something that, as Kieran said, we're the first of this kind for this type of project, and so there's not really precedent for us to lean on, and so we're really kind of evolving as we go, and really trying to stay ahead of the pack, so to speak, by kind of taking a deep dive on our team with soil scientists that are providing those insights for us. Here's a photo taken in one of the Project Conservancy's Mayby. This was taken during a site visit with an auditor. We were doing a week-long sampling event, and so you can see here, the bare ground that kind of dominates this landscape, and what essentially happens with these auditor visits is, like I said, they're there to really test the project, and so they, for anyone that's ever worked with an auditor, it's their job to be the bad guy, so to speak, and so they come in and they're really trying to put you through the ringer and understand if this project is actually performing to what has been said as claims for the project. So this was a incredible week for me personally. It was my first time in Kenya, and aside from working with an auditor during my first week in Kenya, which maybe it'd be nice to go back without that burden, but no, it was incredible to kind of be camping out in the bush for a week. So of interest to many of you, I'm sure, and as Kieran said, the project does participate in that CCB standard, right? And so we do have an obligation to understand the change, the impact of our project as it relates to biodiversity. And so, in addition to kind of, looking at the impacts of plants, insects, and birds, we're also developing surveys to understand how is the project influencing these how's the project influencing these plants, insects, and birds? How is it providing a sanctuary for those organisms that that may not have had a chance to rest and recover prior to the inclusion of kind of these project activities. I will say that for any kind of CCB standard, there is going to be a pretty rigorous review of any surveys that you will put forward. And so prior to the project start date, we had to have a biodiversity survey that was essentially validated prior to validation. So we had we essentially had a third-party ecologist that came in and kind of worked with us to develop a biodiversity survey that could then be implemented and eventually validated and used for the life of the project. And so we survey every 3 years to kind of as a a cadence to understand the changes in biodiversity. So in addition to looking at the biodiversity impacts on plants, insects, and birds, the project also monitors vertebrates, specifically key trigger species. And so the project really works closely. We're fortunate that we can work closely with NRT's Wildlife Comms program to really understand the impact of the project on wildlife as it relates to threatened and endangered species, and especially understanding kind of the counts, the densities, the movements of these species, and of course, the human-livestock interactions throughout the landscape. And so over time, I think the project really aims to, improve these rangeland habitat conditions for these species, and really, hopefully, right, reduce the need for these animals to use protected areas as drought refugia. So another slide you'll likely be unable to read from back there, but this is just an example of how we have tracked project reporting to date. And so it's a simple Excel slide workbook that we utilize, but it does allow us to stay organized. As you can imagine, there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of data that comes in. Working with 13 project conservancies, and so you can see this is from 2023. There are certainly opportunities where we can improve our reporting deadlines, but it's something that I think is a positive thing to look at, in my opinion, because if you look at, say, Nybunga Lower, they've missed a few reports in the past few months in terms of submitting them to us, but we've actually reached out to the rangeland coordinators at Nybunga to understand, hey, what's going on? Is there something that is not clicking? Are there questions about the grazing report templates? And so we see that as kind of opportunities to continue to improve the project. And of course, this all needs to be green by the time you get to a verification review with an auditor. But on the way, it's kind of another built-in mechanism for us to understand how the project is progressing. So I think while everyone loves a good Excel workbook, we are certainly excited to be moving forward with EarthRanger, and that it really provides us a home that is built to handle large amounts of data, and also provides us with the tools to do kind of spatial analysis and trend analysis, and also I think for us it provides us with a place to showcase the project in a way that maybe we haven't been able to before. One of the takeaways I learned this week was about the public site feature that EarthRanger provides, and so I think that's something that NRT is going to certainly want to implement into their own communications with project supporters, so that supporters can see in real time how the project is progressing, and they can have that access to that data that's previously that it came through reports that weren't as interactive.
Yeah, and I think just to set the context again, NRT, 6 million hectares, 43 conservancies, data coming in on a daily basis. Historically, it's been paper-based and on some sort of mixed databases that collect certain aspects. Just not good. It's not coordinated. And one of the big things I think as practitioners again is making data usable. It's one thing that I found when working with NRT is that we get so much data, but it wasn't being used just because it was so clumsy. So EarthRanger is such a neat way of compiling stuff in a standard way, and then obviously the back end of Tableau and what was it called, Ecoscope, potentially to develop these standard templates that a conservancy manager can access on a weekly, monthly, whatever basis is really important. And this is just an example. I put on 3 tags on some community livestock about 4 weeks ago, which is the first time we've really ever had permission to do this. They're sensitive to it. And where historically we would have been voicing that, saying, yeah, they're moving here and there, trying to draw it on a map, you can immediately see the impact, and you can see that those 3 cows were drinking down there, and then they were living, they were sleeping in the central point, and they had a plan. They were coordinated, they were moving together. So just the visual impact of EarthRanger is immediately, evident.
And I'll just add that I think, obviously the platform of EarthRanger will certainly, having that spatial data visualized, will allow us to, over time, do some sort of trends analysis to understand, where are livestock moving, how does that look compared to the grazing plan, and again, provide areas, for optimization for us. And I'll also just say that I think it's important to note that, this project is really, it's been around for 10 years, and we're now moving into, a digital first in sense that those field-based rangeland coordinators will now be able to utilize that EarthRanger mobile app to input their data directly, as opposed to transcribing that onto a book or transcribing that into an Excel workbook. They'll be able to kind of go right to the source and input that data directly following conversations with herders. So that's a huge improvement for us. So if you leave this session and you're thinking about what it might look like for your organization or agency to develop a high quality carbon project, just wanted to provide a bit of an overview of Native's process and kind of how we go about our business. I think the first step here in evaluate is a really key step in that you need to understand who your partners are, understand what is the core need in the area or the region that you're trying to work in, and then also taking that and looking at what standard, what methodology is going to work best for this project. What's a good fit? What's a good marriage between the carbon requirements and what the actual project is on the ground. So at Native, we really we're really strong on due diligence. It's something that I think is probably our longest aspect of our project development phase. And so that assess is really where we really start to understand the feasibility of a project, the structure, and what are the moving parts of that project. And then also, again, the alignment to whatever that selected standard or methodology is. And then, just a note that this assess stage, this kind of due diligence feasibility assessment should really, be almost the longest stage in your development process, because this is where we say we're trying to break the project, right? This is where we're trying to really put it through a test. And then, almost the exciting, kind of post-assess stage, right, is this pursue to execute, where things are really starting to roll into motion, and maybe contracts are getting signed, implementation agreements are getting signed, and we're really starting to have a clear idea of what this project is going to look like in operations. And so this is also where we get to kind of have those conversations on expectations. And so I think this is a really important part as well, to make sure that expectations are clear across your stakeholders that you're working with, your partners, and of course your team. And so you really want to make sure that those conversations are had, right, so that everyone knows what role and responsibility they play in the project, and also thinking about, again, 20, 30, 40 years down the road, what is this going to look like, not just with the teams and the partners and the personnel you have directly working with you at the moment. And I would say also, this kind of pursue to execute is where I would think, in my opinion, one of the most important parts of any project is the free, prior, and informed consent, so your FPIC processes. And so this is where you really need to take time to understand, how am I going to ensure that my stakeholders are aware of the project and understand, what is being required of them. And so Kieran will talk about that in a minute. But then finally, leading up to that kind of between execute and manage phase is that all time intensive validation process. And so, this is where the rubber hits the road, essentially. And so everything that you've kind of developed up to this point is tested. And so that's where that third-party auditor comes in and really seeks to, not only see if the project has what it takes, but also looks into the future and says, is this project going to be able to, stand on its own 2 feet, 20, 30, 40 years down the road. And so that's the exciting part, is when you can kind of have all of your work kind of culminate in that execute stage, and you can understand, like, yes, we're ready for validation. We've done the work. It's time to celebrate this milestone. And then moving into manage. This is again your day to day, right? Your monitoring, reporting, and verification. So this is where you just want to be sure that you're keeping an eye out for optimizations. You're not getting kind of steady in your processes, and you're always keeping an eye on whatever applied science you're trying to incorporate, whatever technologies you might be able to incorporate. So just keeping an eye on optimization, avenues for optimization throughout your manage is extremely important.
And I mean, that's the stage we're at now is this. We're by no means perfect. These recent media attacks have really shown us, where gaps are, and it's going to be the major part of our investment over the coming 3 to 5 years is how we can make this better. And we've got lots of plans and lots of exciting plans. Remember, we're the first, we're pioneering, so we've got to pioneer plans. So it's complicated. Lessons learned, so we'll just go through these quickly because I'm sure there'll be questions. Carl mentioned this FPIC, and it's massive. Back in 2012, NRT had the full buy-in from the conservancies they were engaging. There was no issues, there was no hassles, there was no grievances. The issue was, it wasn't documented. Okay, and obviously major agreements were documented and signed, but all the small meetings that were held under trees, all the time that was spent, back then it just wasn't significant, and people had no idea where carbon was going to go. People don't even have words for this in their local languages. So it was like, why would we write this down? But if any of you are starting on a project now in this day and age, just document everything and document it properly. It's a really strong word of advice.
And then can I just add that and explain the reason why, right, you're asking for all this documentation? Because sometimes it can also be a cultural thing between, why do I need to take minutes for a meeting? And certainly we've run into that. And so having those conversations early on, again, that expectation setting is important here.
Yeah, because then that leads on to point number 2, which is the media, which will pick holes in everything. We all know that, and human rights activists will tear everything apart, even though a lot of it has got no leg to stand on. Sound governance. Anyone who works in the community landscape, that's probably their number 1 priority in investment, and it's not an easy one to achieve, but that governance needs to be at all levels, from the village level right up to the project proponent level, and they need to work together. National legislation is a really evolving space, and obviously it'll be country dependent. Some countries are really in this for the win for their communities and end users. Others are in it for their own win, and obviously that really has the opportunity to make or break it. And then Carl just
and then quickly just upfront costs, and technical requirements. Please don't underestimate what it's going to take to not only get the project off the ground, but also to continue to improve your project. And so this is where I really can advocate for, really choosing your partners carefully, whether it's your implementation partner on the ground or a development partner that's going to help you get that project validated. And then finally, be flexible. The voluntary carbon market in particular is evolving and changing. It depends on kind of multiple factors depending on like the supporters and what the market's asking for, but also what are, like Kieran said, what are national legislations saying and doing following Article 6. And so really be willing to be flexible in the development of your project and also the ongoing operations, because there will be changes that get implemented into your requirements that you will have to adapt to.
So just in summary, personal reflections. I know a lot of people in the landscape, and a lot of criticism comes in about we're not seeing grass tomorrow. The reality is this is a broken cultural structure which requires a massive social change and behavior change. That takes time. This is a 30-year project. My opinion is, in a project as complex as this, the first 10 years should be focused on behavior change, which is what we've done. We've been doing that since 2012. And now what is really exciting is we're beginning to see these small pockets of change happening within the landscape. And yes, they're small, but small breeds big. And as I say, in 4 of the conservancies, as we speak, as the rains have just started, they had seeded grass that they were still grazing in a planned way at the end of the dry season, which really was unheard of 2 or 3 years ago. So it's working, and we're really excited that the next 20 years are going to bring a serious positive change to northern Kenya. So on that, any questions would be more than welcome. There's some websites, have a look at it. This is a really useful website to look at the project itself, go into the detail and the beneficiaries and everything. There's more about us as Native, and a newsletter if you want to follow it, and feel free to email us. But we'd love to take some questions.
Yeah,
we've
absolutely.
got 10 minutes or so.
Pass this around.
Any questions?
Is this on?
Thank you guys for a good presentation.
We are implementing a similar project here in South Africa. I think we are in about around 1,000 of a 10,000 round heavyweight fight. We are battered and bruised and don't know if we're coming or going. Also doing soil carbon. I've just got 3 questions. So that's the background to the questions that I'll ask is, firstly, the split between the income generated from the carbon credit between the relevant parties. We've negotiated a split. I'll be interested to hear if you're willing to share what that percentage is between all the parties. Secondly, soil sampling in such vast areas. How do you feel about undersampling and getting a good indication? Because that's where the numbers are in the results of soil sampling. Yes, we can do grazing and burning and alien plant control and all of that. That will theoretically result in increased carbon in the soil. But we feel that the guys doing the sampling are undersampling, and also where they place those sampling points. Third question is, you've got multiple communities and obviously they perform differently. How is the income split? Is it project-based and you just split it equally, or how do you manage underperforming sites that aren't implementing what you say implementing, and then managing that? Obviously you guys we private landowners here in South Africa, but you community guys, jealousy and all of that, where those guys are now getting more than what we're getting. How do you manage that? So thank you.
Good. I'll do 1 and 3 if you do 2. So number 1, yeah. So Native, as Carl said, a carbon asset developer as well as a broker, sales and marketing. So with this initial sales, Native had put up front capital, like I mentioned, that upfront capital to get the project across the line through validation and verification. So for the first 3 years, they recovered those costs because that was the agreement that was signed with NRT and the communities. So this isn't, I'm going to give you two scenarios. The first scenario was that Native took 40%, roughly, it wasn't exactly, but 40%, the project received 60%. And from that 60%, NRT took their fixed costs, and then the communities got the balance. But, as I say, those have now been recouped, so Native strives to get as much back to the communities. The hope is to get it to 25 to 30% to them over the coming 5 years, and then the balance to the communities. Obviously, Kenya's developing legislation as we speak, so we don't know where tax is going to go with that. But yeah, that's what we're hoping to strive for, say 30-70 as a real rough figure. Make sense? And then when it comes to the sharing at the community level, it's a hot topic. It was me who sort of developed this blanket, let's split it 15 ways, and each conservancy gets their fair share at the beginning, just because of simplicity. We had no idea what was going to happen. What's really cool is, as I say, there's that oversight committee, the governance committee of the communities themselves, and they're already beginning to bring questions to us to say, we're underperforming, you're overperforming, these guys have got fewer people than us, we've got more livestock than them, we've got different soils, all these different combinations, which are really cool. I'm really glad they are bringing them. So the current agreement we have is until 2025, or their agreement, it's not ours, it's their agreement until 2025, and then from there we're going to be re-looking at that, and I think it will become very much performance-based and also actual genuine, what are you sequestering based. And we're hoping to introduce like a bonus and penalty system so there's more incentive for better management. Make sense? But I can give you the details after with more than that.
So on the soil sampling question, great question. I think one of the first key steps there is to really understand, are you going to do measured to measured, right? Or are you going to do measured modeled, or really something that's really unheard of, but just straight modeled? And so we decided to go with that measured modeled approach. And so I think the first step is really understanding that biogeochemical model that you're going to essentially calibrate for the project area that you're working on. And then, as part of that validation exercise, there's actually a separate piece that's just focused on the validation of that model to that area. And so that's a really key part to kind of ensuring that you're comfortable with the rigor of those estimates that are coming out of that model that you've selected. In terms of sampling, yes, we're 1.9 million hectares. Like, it is a difficult place to sample, intensely. There's also places within the landscape that are just hard to get to, frankly. And so this is where you really are relying on not only the stratification of your soil sampling, but you are relying on, statistics in a lot of ways to kind of ensure that you are, taking a statistically significant, number of sampling points throughout the area. And also that kind of analysis will also depend on the power of your model that you've selected. So it's a bit of, hand-in-hand approach with kind of sampling and that model you selected. If you have the feasibility to sample more frequently than what the requirement is kind of asking you to, then that's of course like our approach. We try to sample at max every 5 years, but if we can sample less than every 5 years, that's fantastic. And that model is really just kind of providing with you the understanding of like change over time in between those sampling events. So you can use the sampling events to really fine tune your model as you go. And I'll just say that again, there isn't a lot of data with kind of the application of these models and soil sampling, and so everyone's doing the best they can to kind of provide rigor to their projects, and so yeah, the more sampling you can do at fewer time intervals, then the better, and yeah. Sorry, that was long.
So yeah, just really quickly on the first one, I forgot to really reinforce that that carbon developer broker aspect, they provide a service. So you shouldn't, people just say, oh, they're taking 30% for sales. It's sales plus a big service in terms of all the technical support. So just bear that in mind. Yeah, risk, massive risk. It's a massive risk. So it's really important to make sure that's recognized.
On the funds that the community get, the 60 or 70% of the funds, does the operator, I presume that you're the operator, how do you govern what they spend their money on, firstly? And secondly, what type of expenses are having the biggest impact on the whole community rather than just the leadership in the community?
Yep, good question. So that oversight committee I mentioned is called the CPOC, Carbon Program Oversight Committee. They are the ones that govern that. Okay, so a conservancy is allocated $324,000. They have to come to that CPOC with their plan, and that basically gets approved. And as I say, within that, there's a 40-60 split again. So the conservancy level, 40% of it has to go to operations, which are very accounted for, very simple. NLT manages those with them because they're known costs. We know what it costs to pay a ranger or a manager. On the 60%, it's a really important process. So when it comes to the CPOC will review that and say, have they ticked all the boxes? Have they gone through a formal community engagement process to get approval at that level? Have they then looked at the BOQ and how much it's going to cost, and then into the process of like tendering? What are they going to do to tender for this project? And once the CPOC are happy with that, they sign it off and say, this is cool, it's your money to use as you want. But then they have to account on that. So there's this sort of recurrent feedback loop. And if they mess around with it, then they won't get any more money until they've proven why. Make sense?
We work together, so we're talking about this a lot. One thing that people don't realize is that there's a price factor here, right? So one of the hardest parts about a carbon credit project is that you're working preemptively with community on development plans, but there's an expectation that you have to set about how much that might look like. So I guess the question is, how do you guys mitigate against that price volatility, and how do you prepare the community for that?
Yeah. We were quite lucky in the fact that we were the first one because no one knew it was going to come. And I agree, that sort of 7 years I spent pre-revenue flowing to the ground, every question was how much are we going to get? And we were quite lucky, as I say, because no one knew, because it was a new thing. I think going forward, you just got to be honest. You can show them how the market trends are up and down, and the reality that it could secure $15 a ton, it could secure $8 a ton, it could secure $30 a ton. No one really knows. And also that it's going to change year on year. We're quite clear to these communities that they've received this 324,000 because that was a sale from 3 years. But when we go down to sort of annual, which we're hoping to, annual sort of cadences of verification, it's going to be very, very different year on year depending on the market. So I think it's all about just, again, expectation management, and don't ever say a figure is my sort of advice. Just keep it really broad.
And I'll just add that, the marketability of your project is also a consideration. The market is dictating, which types of projects are more attractive in the moment. And so just, having that mindset when you are developing a project, is this marketable? What does that look like? What are supporters saying they're looking for?
And also, the critical thing is that it's not free money, that they have to work for it. That's the really, really strong message that you must deliver from day one. It's not a grant, it's something they've got to earn.
So for an organization that's just starting working on the carbon project, how how do you go about the community engagement aspect to ensure that these communities actually understand the process? Yes, even from the presentation, you can tell that these are quite technical steps, but how do you break down that information to ensure that the community actually understands the steps that go into it, and also, as you said, managing their expectations? What channels do you use?
Yeah.
I mean, just the techniques, basically.
You know, again, this project's been really lucky because it was built on the back of NRT, the Northern Rangelands Trust, and they are an umbrella organisation for community conservancies, and their whole mandate was to set up a governance structure which allowed exactly what you're talking about. So a formal route of engagement to communities. You know, my advice on this is follow legislation. You know, in Kenya, they're stipulating that we have to engage at least, or get signatures from at least 70% of the registered community members, and of that, there has to be a significant portion of women. So follow legislation, number one. And then secondly, in terms of how to do it, you know, we're developing a number of tools, from cartoons to sort of vernacular radio using local languages to social media, to make sure that messages can just be delivered blanket everywhere, so that, you know, in theory, everyone can see them. And then the other big one that we've really embraced recently are these AGMs. So each conservancy will hold multiple AGMs, or whole regional AGMs, where every community member from an area has to come. The message is delivered in each region, and then it comes up to a sort of a general AGM at the conservancy level, minuted, documented, signed, so that no one can say they were never told. So that's sort of the general approach, but it's obviously a lot more complicated than that.
Okay, I think we're over time now, so maybe you can bring your question up to the speakers afterwards, but let's give our speakers one last round of applause. Thanks, everyone.